second.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to an evening of World War II history. And to start the evening, I would like to introduce the commander of the VFW, Ed Williams.
Thank you, Carolyn. It's a pleasure to be here. I come from a military family. My relatives were all in World War II, Navy and the Army, and at the Normandy invasion and Pacific. I'm wearing this famous green beret because in 1962, on a field in North Carolina, I was awarded this along with a bunch of other fellas from a guy named John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And that was the starting of the famous Green Berets Special Forces. I was sent to Korea. Thought I'd be nice and safe over there. It was 1963 and 64. And lo and behold, like I found out from the captain tonight, I studied French and I spoke French for 4 years. And I suddenly got an invitation to go to a place called Vietnam. And I was one of the advisors of the advisory war in 1963 and 64. And like the history of World War II, you had a beginning, you had a middle, and you had an end. In Vietnam, we never really knew where the beginning was. The beginning that we remember is 1965. They put a wall up for the people that didn't make it back from Vietnam. They had to add 2 panels to that wall in the center of it, panel 1A and panel 1B. And it's for all my comrades that died prior to 1965 in a place called Vietnam, that we weren't even at war yet. So, knowing what our brothers up here have gone through, I wear it on my chest, very proudly, for those who are in the infantry. There's a combat infantry badge that says that I put my time in the trench. I came back home and went to work and raised a family like these gentlemen did. And I joined the VFW, and you won't believe what my first job was, is I was the chaplain. And one of the reasons why I was asked to come here tonight is to say a prayer. So with your blessings, I will read a short prayer for our comrades. And it goes like this. Let us bow our heads, O sovereign ruler of the universe, who art the Lord of hosts and the God of peace. Without thee, our efforts are vain. We beseech thee, O God, to bless the dependents of our departed comrades, and to comfort all who gave their lives to our nation's cause. We now have a moment of silent prayer for our departed comrades, and for those missing in action, and for those held prisoners of war. These and all other necessary blessings we ask of thee, mighty ruler of the universe. Helen?
Thank you, Ed. On behalf of the Wilmington Historical Commission, my name is Carolyn Sullivan Harris, and I'm the chairperson of the commission. I want to welcome you once again to this evening, which has been a goal of the Wilmington Historical Commission for many years. It is so important that we preserve our history through videotaping our veterans and listening to their stories and their memories. This will become a nucleus for generations to come. America's history is your history. You made it. And now we're going to record your memories. And again, I want to thank each and every one of you for being here tonight. And I'm hoping that this program is going to be the beginning of more tapings, more programs, so that we can get on record the wonderful stories and memories of our veterans throughout Wilmington. I would like to thank the Veterans Monument Committee for their support in bringing this program to you this evening. And I have a very special thanks to a very special individual here, without whom this panel couldn't have been organized, and this evening wouldn't have been presented. and that is Gerry O'Reilly. Gerry has been a supporter of the Historical Commission and our programs for years. He's come to us with his many wonderful projects, Wilmington a Retrospective and Silver Lake Revisited, and we've worked with him on that program to compilate pictures of Wilmington and to present them to the public. And coming to our meetings, he's heard us again and again mention that we'd like to do a video history. And he came to me several months ago and said, we can do this. I'm really excited about this project. Let me help you. And you know, for months, that's what he's been doing. He's been organizing this evening. So I'd really like a round of applause and a thanks to Gerry O'Reilly. The format this evening will be, each of the participants will have approximately 10 minutes to share with us their memories of their experiences during World War II. And then we're going to open it up to a discussion with audience participation. I'm going to introduce each individual, and then I'm simply going to turn it over to each of them, again, to share their memories with us. George Foley from Parker Street enlisted in the Navy in 1943, and he's representing the Pacific Theater. Paul Godzyk from Parker Street enlisted in the Navy in 1942 and served in the Pacific Theater. Bill McNabb from Fitz Terrace joined the Marines in 1942 and served in the Pacific Theater. Bill Nee from Harris Street joined the Coast Guard in 1942 and served in the Atlantic Theater and off the coast of Newfoundland. And Tom Galka from Atlantic Ave, he joined the Army in 1942 and served in the European Theater in North Africa. And Walter Muse from Muse Ave joined the Army in 1942, and he also served in the European Theater. And we have Captain Neilson, who served in the Merchant Marine from the 1930s through World War II. His ship traveled the Atlantic and Pacific, often unarmed and unescorted, bringing needed supplies to our allies. So I'm looking forward for these gentlemen to share their memories with us. And I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Foley.
Came to the house and asked me to speak. I was reading the newspaper, and the headline was "To Hell and Back." It was about the Red Sox recent road trip to Cleveland, and I couldn't help but think that that was the most appropriate definition of what we're here to talk about. My first assignment when I went in the service was the USS San Francisco. The Frisco was the second most decorated ship in the United States Navy. It was awarded a Presidential Unit Citation and is the only ship where there were 4 Congressional Medal of Honors awarded in one battle. My first combat, I joined that ship just after they came back to the States to be repaired. My first combat experience was at Lady Gulf in October of 1944. We were assigned to Admiral Halsey's 3rd Fleet. We were the flagship of Cruiser Division 6 under Rear Admiral J. Turner Joy. After we left Lady, the 3rd Fleet prepared to take MacArthur back to Luzon, but we ran into a typhoon on December 17th and 19th and we had 2 casualties ourselves, but that was peanuts compared to our escort ships. We lost the Hull, the Spence, and the Monaghan, 3 brand new 2200 destroyers out of the United States. They were our escort. They had a total of 800 men lost. Only 6 survived from the Monaghan. We also had a little touch of Wilmington there too in that same typhoon. The Pittsburgh was another heavy cruiser with a kid from Wilmington aboard her called Donald Gammon. Some of you probably will remember. She lost 30 feet of her bow in that same typhoon and wound up going to Noumea for a new repair job. After Lady Gulf, we started over towards Luzon and participated in that engagement there. And this is where we first ran into the kamikazes. After we secured Luzon, we went back to Ulithi, and then we gathered for the invasion of Iwo Jima. We were assigned a bombardment status there, and together with the battleship Tennessee, we provided call fire for the pulverization, or tried to, of Mount Surabaki. And it turned out that this Iwo Jima engagement was the worst suffered ever. Was the worst that they ever suffered, the Marines ever suffered in one battle. While we were there at Iwo Jima, we were assigned to a fast carrier task force with several carriers to make a strike on Tokyo in Japan. And it was during this fast carrier task force strike that we suffered damage in the rough weather, and we had to go back to Ulithi for the Ulithi anchorage in the Caroline Islands for repairs. That was on March 1st, 1945. It was on March 10th that we were assigned a new captain, and it was Johnny Welchel. I don't know if you people remember him, but he was the head coach at the university, at Annapolis, Maryland, for 4 years prior to that. And he wasn't that experienced a sea captain. However, we made out all right. On March 21st, we sailed for Okinawa, and were assigned a gunfire and covering force. On March 25th, we took up assignment off of Karamaretto, west of Okinawa. Those are a little group of islands off the west coast. Ray Fitch remembers them. To support the minesweepers and the underwater demolition teams. And we opened up with our main batteries and really did a job on them. On March 26th, we commenced bombardment on the 4 main islands of Karamaretto. And the assault force swept over the invasion of the main island. Okinawa was scheduled for, the invasion was scheduled for April 1st. We assembled the largest armada in the world. Even more ships were here than were at Normandy. Nearly 1,300 ships, the granddaddy of all expeditionary forces, loaded with the U.S. 10th Army and several Marine divisions. Some 200,000 men, commanded by General Buckner, who incidentally was killed at Okinawa. The Japs had over 100,000 defenders, and they were backed by the Heavenly Wind, that's the kamikazes, at airfields in Japan, Formosa, and Okinawa. And they kept an almost continuous attack on those 1,300 expeditionary force ships. We were subject to attacks day and night from March 25th till June 21st. I remember one in particular. That was on the first night, I think it was April 1st. We were on the outer perimeter, and we were shelling, and it was twilight. And of course we had ceased shelling for the day. But we saw this Japanese Betty, that's a bomber, swing around on our right side, on our port side, yeah. And she came around to our rear, and we had behind us, we had a destroyer and we had the battleship Maryland. And there were no other escort ships on that side. They were all over on the other side where the action was really going on thick and heavy. The flak was so thick you could get out and walk on it. But anyway, that Betty did a curve right around, came on over the destroyer, dropped one bomb, and when it went off, the destroyer did about a 45 roll, and then she dropped the second bomb and did a 45 roll the other way. And then she started coming, she saw the Maryland, but then she started coming towards us. Well, I was up in the after superstructure at the time. That was my AA defense station. And I was wearing headphones up there, and I could see this plane getting closer, only a few hundred feet above us. And it was getting closer and closer. You could see those big red rising suns on the wings. And one of our 5-inch shells exploded right under her nose and flipped it over, and she just flooded down slow and lazy, and she hit the number 3 turret on the Maryland behind us. Well, on top of the number 3 turret, they had a quad mount 40 gun crew. That was about 6 men, and she wiped that out when the bombs went off. But boy, I'm telling you, we were all scared as hell on that. Then two nights later, I was getting off my mid-watch, 12 to 4, and I heard a Japanese bomber fly right overhead, just above the mast. And then I could hear the watchman out on the bow yell, "Featherweight." Well, I looked down, I was going down a ladder at the time to go back to my rack. And I looked out and I could see that torpedo cross our bow about 12 feet ahead of us. And that's where we stored all our aviation gas for our 4 spotting planes. And that was another close call. During those weeks on the firing line, we were firing almost continually. And boy, I'm telling you, there's no resting when those guns are going off periodically, every so many minutes. During the Okinawa operation, the San Francisco suffered only 2 injuries aboard, and both of them were spotting plane pilots that were hit with shrapnel. After Okinawa, we sailed to San Pedro Bay in Leyte for exercises in preparation for Operation Olympic. That's the invasion of Kyushu, Japan. That was a code name, Operation Olympic. Fortunately, it never materialized. August 4th, San Francisco spent the weekend in Manila City, which had been reduced to rubble by the retreating Japs, who also tried to block Manila Bay by scuttling and sinking all kinds of vessels in the bay, in the channels. On August 6th, we weighed anchor for Subic Bay, dropped anchor in time to get word that an A-bomb had been dropped on Hiroshima. 3 days later, another one was dropped on Nagasaki. On August 14th, Japan surrendered. On September 2nd, they had the signing on the Missouri at Tokyo Bay. Our admiral, who was our commander, commandant of Cruiser Division 6, which is our ship, was assigned to accept the Japanese surrender on of all their naval facilities in Korea, and also to supervise the landing of the 29th Army Corps for the occupation of Korea. I was assigned as a member of that committee. There's only about 12 of them, so this little nobody from Wilmington finally got a decent job. Admiral Wright later became Supreme Allied Commander of NATO forces. On November 4th, Cruiser Division 6 was officially dissolved. We were the flag all the time that I was aboard that ship. On November 27th, the USS San Francisco had its turn to make the magic carpet run to Okinawa, Pearl Harbor, and San Francisco. We arrived at Pearl on December 10th and on December 17th at the Golden Gate. On January 5, we set sail for Philadelphia via the Panama Canal, arriving in Philadelphia on January 19th, 1946, and on February 10th, the USS San Francisco was decommissioned. And there's a line that one of the fellows on our ship used, and I'm going to quote it here. He wrote a book on the history of the USS San Francisco. There's a ship that had 12 years in service and gathered 17 battle stars out of a possible 19 in the Pacific. Thus ended the career of one of the most illustrious warships ever to sail the oceans of this world. To those who sailed on her, she was the world's greatest ship. That's about it.
I guess it's my turn now. Paul Godzyk from Wilmington. When I went into the Navy, I went in as a third-class machinist, motor machinist. And I was sent to Perth Amboy, New Jersey to pick up a ship. She was being built in Perth Amboy. They laid the keel, they built the whole ship. I was there for almost a month, and at the end of that time we had a ship, and we brought it to the Solomons Island in Maryland for shakedown cruises. These shakedown cruises are necessary to get all the bugs out of the machinery and the equipment and have all the crew that are going to run the ship. Going to have all the crew there so that they know what their job is and what's to be done and how to do it, and see if anything falls off it before we have to go to war. And from the Solomons, we went through. My wife told me to write this all down. At the Solomon Islands, I better put on my glasses. Excuse me, folks. I think I got a pair.
Should have wrote bigger.
Thicker.
You're older.
Yes, I am. Probably they were 100 than you are.
People were going to make the speech that you had notes in that.
And after we had our shakedown cruises and stuff out in the Chesapeake Bay, then we went down through the Panama Canal into San Diego, California. At San Diego, I had my last leave. That leave, they gave me a week, which I took to come home to Wilmington, Massachusetts. And it was very uneventful all the way to my house and back. I had hopped on different aircraft that were going my way. And going back to San Diego, I hopped a ship, an airplane in New York, a B-25 bomber, which they put me in the bomb bay for a free ride. And in St. Louis, Missouri, we come down through the clouds in St. Louis, Missouri, and an advanced trainer come up through the clouds and took our left engine right out, tore it right off the ship, and we had a crash landing. In the meantime, I'm standing there. We have a little hole. I'm looking out the porthole, and suddenly the ship is beginning to drop because I see all the aluminum plates falling off of the wings. Pretty soon I'm standing down, and the little window is down there, and there's harnesses all along the wall where the bomber, they used to tie the bombs up before they dropped them through the hole. So I climbed up through the harnesses as best I could, climbed up, and all of a sudden the crash. When the crash came, I think I probably gained 1.5 feet in stature, and I was light as a feather. In the meantime, we were over the St. Louis airport, and all the airport attendants and fire trucks and all the equipment, machinery, and everything else that they had arrived. I don't recall whether I got out through a hole. They got me through a door, but I got out of that plane. In the meantime, I was told to stay right beside that ambulance and not to move. In the meantime, I was so light, I looked around, and I understand that the pilot got killed, and the co-pilot had a broken arm, but the advanced trainer smashed up in a cornfield, and it took him an hour to find it. In the meantime, I looked around, and the people were all around the place, and so I slowly walked backwards and backwards and backwards until I got about 100 feet away from them. And I looked across the airport, and there was an Eastern Airlines across the airport. So I finally got clear of that, and I headed for the airlines, got in. I told them I wanted a ticket to San Diego. It was $78.80, I think it was, and I had $100 left in my pocket for my trip. So I bought the ticket. I got to San Diego. And when I got to San Diego, I'm sure that I'm tabulated someplace in St. Louis, Missouri, being 3 in the plane, but they only found 2. I couldn't report in because my ship was leaving for Hawaii. When I got to San Diego, the cabbie that I got, I told him my problem, that I was late, and he went down as far as he could go, and then I coaxed him into going further, and of course there's long, long piers down there where the ships are tied in. And as I got to the end of the pier, I could see the smoke coming out of the smokestack of my ship, and they had the line still on the bow, but the back end of the ship was already moving from the pier. The propeller was going around, it was pulling back. I guess they call it a statch rope or something. And they were just getting the back end out so they could swing the front end out, and they're leaving for Hawaii, and I'm still on the pier. Well, I ran full speed. And I had a little blue bag with me with a few possessions, which consisted maybe a couple of handkerchiefs and a pair of shorts or something. Very little. I threw it aboard and I dove for the ship. I got on the stern, I got a hold of the guardrail, held on, and as I was holding on, I looked down and there's that great big monstrous screw going around, just like that. If I'd have missed that, I wouldn't be here today. However, I made it, get back aboard ship, and then we went down through to Hawaii. And in Hawaii, as far as I'm concerned, it was a pleasure cruise. It was more or less a pleasure cruise up till this time. But we got to Hawaii, and then from Hawaii, we hopped different islands all the way down through to New Caledonia. And finally, we come up through the Solomons, which had been invaded and neutralized, and got to we got to New Guinea. And from New Guinea, we picked up there a hold full of amphibious craft and soldiers. So we picked up Marines, and we headed for our first invasion, which was the Kwajalein in the Marshall Islands. And Kwajalein wasn't a very big operation, but we got there. And after arriving there at daybreak, you could see beautiful island, vegetation, beautiful trees and stuff. Well, by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I could see the ocean on the other side of the island. There was nothing left there. It was just completely cut down. There was nothing left there. It was a small operation, but nevertheless, we were constantly harassed by Jap Zeros and aircraft fire of all kinds. And we finally got back again to New Guinea. And this time at New Guinea, we picked up the 3rd Marine Division, plus all the alligators and tanks and stuff into the hold because I was on an LST. And after we got all situated, the convoy of many, many ships, hundreds probably, but it was a great convoy, and we headed for the Mariana Islands, which consists of Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, but our objective was Guam. And when we got to Guam, at daybreak, as we got to Guam, we were being attacked by many Japanese planes. And they didn't know where the planes were coming from, but they were coming from another island that the government at that time, the United States, had overlooked, but it existed there. And we slowed down a little. We put the invasion off for another day because of the harassment that we had from the Japanese aircraft. The following day, we hit that beach. The day that we hit the beach, as the Marines knew, we laid the ladders off the side of the ship, and the Marines all went down ropes into small boats, the landing craft. And the landing craft were lined up for miles. All these craft were in the water. And they called for a volunteer in a small boat because a Marine officer came aboard, and this Marine officer was in charge of the scupper drivers and that had gone into the water the night before and had blasted through the coral and through the barbed wire and all the hazards that the Japs had put into the ocean in order to curb an invasion. And this officer stood on the bow of this little boat that I offered to go on. And he stood up front there, just like George Washington crossing the Potomac. He really was a brave guy. that I give him credit. He stood right up there perfectly straight with the bullets coming and all the mortar shells and everything else, and lined up. There were, well, as far as your eye could see, there were all these small boats, all these invasion crafts to the left and to the right. Further down, LSTs, further down, all had men in the water in small boats, all along for miles. Now, these men get into these small boats, and they sort of bivouac, but the officer that was aboard that whether he volunteered or not, I don't know, I did. The small boat, he kept pointing where he wanted the boats to go. And when we got within a couple of 100 feet of the island, and now it was pretty rough going because the Japs were firing knee mortars and all kinds of mortars. You heard the buzzing of the bombs going with the bullets and the lead and all the stuff they threw at us. And then these small boats, the officer pointed, one would fall in from this side, one on the other, and they'd go right up the channel that had been blown out the night before. Then you get on the beach, and then they started to, once they get on the beach, the first tanks and alligators that hit the beach, they all sort of went off to either side, and some of the tanks went up straight, and the alligators that were carrying maybe 30 or 40 men at a time, they hit the beach, and they dropped off the men, and they started their operation going up towards the hill. Now, in the meantime, the Marine Corps hit what they call Red Beach. Red Beach was a solid ledge. This solid ledge had caves. And in those caves, they had great big guns. And these big guns come out on the rails. They shot at the ships at sea that were out 1 mile, 2 or 3 miles out to sea, the big ships, the battleships and so forth. They would shoot, and then they'd recoil back into the cave to reload and keep coming out. But it was solid ledge. This is what the Marines had to cope with. And I think that there were 7 waves that I was fortunate enough to go in there with without getting hit. In the meantime, I understand that all the other LSTs put boats out the same way with men in it and an officer that knew where the channels were to replace us. And thank God we survived to about noontime without any problems. We put 7 waves of machinery and equipment, tanks and men on that beach. And that was the difficult part. Now the foolish part, I went on the beach with the 3rd Marine Division. In the meantime, our ship had backed off, gone off further out, couldn't get back. Not only I, but there's 3 of us that were sailors off of the same LST. So we spent the night with the Marines on Guam when the old flak was flying. And I'll tell you, there's nothing as scary in the world as to be out in that place when the bombs from this guy's guns were coming in over the top of us like 3 balls of fire. Those shells, when they come off the battleship, were 3 balls of fire, red hot. And when they went overhead, they sounded like an express train. The whirring sound almost deafened you. Now these fellows were out to sea, and when they were shooting over us, we were on the beach, and the Navy was shooting in on the Agana, the city, above our heads. And this is the thing that we had that we tolerated, being in the LST that I was with. And this went on, and during the night, when there was crossfire, the Marines were fighting back and forth and shooting one another, and the sharpshooters were waiting for a gun to break up on the hill someplace where there's a spark of fire. They were shooting right into the fire. It was a pretty scary operation. And then all of a sudden there'd be a flare. The Japanese flare would go way up at the sky. It had a yellow, sort of a yellow color. and the parachute would come down. And as that flare come down to the earth, those palm trees that were around where I was in a hole, the palm trees, they were extended, they were getting taller, the shadows and everything else. It was pretty frightening. And that's how I spent the night. The next morning when I looked out there, there was a round circle where I stood with a machine gun that I'd picked up from a Marine, and where I had been going around in circles just with my feet into the soft mush in order to whatever might have happened. And it was a personal experience, and it was pretty scary. The American dropped phosphorus lights too, but they were brighter. But nevertheless, the shadows were the same, and it was pretty frightening to hear all the guns going off everywhere else, and little pops here and there and everywhere else. And to see the dead around, it was a pretty rough situation for me. The Marines were trained more for it than I was, but nevertheless, I survived it. And that was the invasion of Guam. And finally, a couple of weeks later, we ended up going back to New Guinea for a new bunch of men and a new situation to go to Leyte in the Philippine Island. Now that's another story. How many minutes do I have?
Give it a go.
How many minutes do I Because I can talk for an hour on each one of these invasions, and I had 5 of them.
You get 30 seconds. You get 30 seconds.
I got 30 seconds. That's it, folks. I had one heck of a time. Thank you.
Anyway, I'd like to thank the committee, and especially Gerry, and all you people that came tonight. But Gerry came down and asked me if I'd come here and discuss World War II. And I said, Gerry, that was over 50 years ago. I forgot what I had for breakfast. But I got a few notes anyway. I enlisted in the Marine Corps October 1st, 1942. And I was, of course, sent to Paris Island. I survived that by keeping my mouth shut and doing what they told me. Immediately after boot camp, I was assigned to the 3rd Amphibious Marine Corps. It was a Fleet Marine Force, and I knew my life was going to be very exciting. We were immediately ordered to New Zealand, which was a surprise, to defend North and South Islands, because the Japs had threatened to invade Australia and New Zealand because their men were all over in North Africa fighting General Rommel. It was 10,000 miles away, and I chuckled at that because a couple of months previous, the East Boston cops had chased me off a corner for vagrancy. And I never thought they'd send me this far. But we stayed there 6 months. The New Zealand people were wonderful. And they were very grateful for us coming to help them. But nobody came, so they shipped us up to Guadalcanal. Guadalcanal was not too bad for our outfit because it's pretty well secured. We were going to relieve the 1st Marine Division. There's a couple of incidents that happened on the canal that I'd rather not talk about because they're horrible, and there might be mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers here. It wouldn't do any good to talk about them. But we did some mopping up of operations, caves and dugouts and what have you, and we secured the island, Guadalcanal, and we were sent up to a Bougainville, which was north of the canal, and but still in the Solomons. Bougainville was a horror show. We landed at night, and the boats couldn't get in close to the beach, so we had to roll barrels of high-octane gas into the beach. And the Japs were popping neem waters all around us. It was just the grace of God. There's nobody else that we didn't get hit. We would all have been burned to death in the water. Bougainville was a jungle so dense I can't describe it, and infested with Japanese, and they say headhunters, which is just what we needed. But they never wanted to make their acquaintance. We secured the island, and we went back to Guadalcanal for R&R. The only R&R I seen was picking up coconuts. Well, shortly after we were again ordered to go up and invade Guam. And Paul here has described everything very well, I'll say. On the way up, our ship stopped at Saipan, because the 2nd Division was ashore there, and they wanted to see if they needed us. And while we were anchored, you go up in deck and you could see hundreds of Japanese women dragging their children down to the edge of a cliff, commit suicide. And you throw up over the side watching. It was terrible. But we went on to Guam. Guam had once been a U.S. naval base, and had been occupied by the Japanese for 4 years, and it was well fortified. We pulled a fast one there. The Marines sent 2 divisions in, knowing that the Japs were down at Agana, the main city. Oh, by the way, the Navy had been there and had given what they call a Halsey haircut. That's... So the 2 divisions went in small boats, and as soon as they got close, they swung around and come back out to the ships. And knowing that there was a lot of Japs up in the northern part of Agate, where we wanted to land. And they scrambled. They seen us going in to Agana, and they scrambled for the southern tip, and we walked ashore up at the northern end, so I didn't have to go through what Paul described. But from there on in, working our way down to the southern tip, it was bad. It was bad. The Japs were famous for digging into caves, and you had to use flamethrowers to get them out. They wouldn't be alive when they come out. They'd be on fire. We had to do it. We had Marines going around with bullhorns, begging them. We knew there was women and children in these caves. We'd beg them to come out. At least send the men and women out. I mean, the women and the children. The Japs are fanatics. They are fanatics. They want to die for the emperor.
Crazy is the word.
So that was it. We had to help them die. We would do it. So after 3 or 4 months, we secured the island, and it wasn't long before we got word that shape up, we were going to hit the big one, Okinawa. Paul described that. It seemed like you could walk from one ship to another. There were so many. Then when the Kamasakis would come in, the sky would be black with flak, just like you could get out of the plane and walk on it. But we went ashore, and we didn't have too much difficulty again. But we had to get over a range of mountains to get back down to Agana, where the Japs were all holed up. And to do that, the Japs were dug in caves on both sides of each mountain. So to get up, to get by that cave on the side, we had to bring flamethrowers up again, because they were shooting down at us. Now we get up over the rise, and we start down, they were dug in on the other side. So that meant they were shooting down at us again. And there were 3 mountain ranges just like that, so it was hellish. But we got down to Agana, and there was some heavy fighting, a lot of casualties. And I heard the head man committed suicide, and they gave up, they surrendered. So now here we are, on the Japanese main doorstep. And we knew that we were going to head for the mainland very soon. We were told later that we would invade Nagasaki, our group. We didn't feel up to it. We had had 4 major invasions. And we knew what it would be like to invade Japan with those fanatics. Tokyo Rose was beeping at us that they knew about our coming and they'd be waiting with pitchforks, knives, and you name it. We just didn't have it. We were mentally and physically pooped. And then a little haberdasher I heard from Missouri dropped the A-bomb. Excuse my language, but I would kiss his ass up State Street. Really. He saved. We had 169,000 men and women, casualties from the Army, Navy, Coast Guard, all of them were in on it. It was a big operation. Now we were going to hit this was even much bigger. God knows how many people would have been lost on both sides. So when he dropped that bomb, I wouldn't be sitting here, and I know it. So that's my story. Thank God I'm here tonight. I don't know anybody else to thank.
I was Coast Guard.
Knee deeper.
We were the little brothers of the Navy. The Coast Guard, in time of war, comes under the Navy. I started off October 25th, I think, in 1942. And they had a receiving station at the Hotel Brunswick in Boston, and a friend of mine and myself joined up. I was sent down to Cape Cod for my boot camp, of all things, at the Provincetown Inn. Pretty luxurious after these fellas' stories, huh? From P-Town, it was on to Newport, Rhode Island, was in port security down there. Captain of the port operations, port security mainly. And I was there for about a year and a half, and the only way we could get out of there would be to